the country's air defenses dealt with the strikes. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini. And for more, joining me now in studio for more is political commentator and Middle East expert Tom Gross. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
First, I'd like to get from you, what are the various reactions on Israel's attack in Iran?
Well, the regime, as you just said, has largely dismissed it. But what I think is more interesting is the people of Iran. I think that people outside Iran, even here in Israel, don't have a clue the extent to which Israel is popular among ordinary Iranians. For example, the IDF Persian spokesperson's clip yesterday was reshared on various opposition channels. On one instance alone on Instagram had 7.5 million views, hundreds of thousands of likes. That's the IDF Persian channel. People may have noticed that in the last year, Iranians have been just about the only people demonstrating with Jews and Israelis in London, in Berlin, in Paris, in Los Angeles, in New York, and even inside Iran. So people are supportive of Israel. Obviously, they're glad that Israel is targeting the regime and not ordinary people. On the other hand, they may share with certain people here in Israel a slight disappointment that the attack wasn't even harder.
So why is there such a difference in reactions from Iranians, let's say, than from reactions in the West?
Well, Iranians have to suffer under the Islamic regime since 1979. I think people in the West really don't have a clue, or don't want to have a clue, about just how awful the regime is there. I mean, there is no BDS against Iran. There are no protests in Columbia or Harvard universities.
Right.
I don't think just students, even the professors in Harvard probably don't have a clue about Evin prison. They don't have a clue about the extent, not just of repression at home, not just the repression of, for example, women, but in the way the Iranian regime has its tentacles in half a dozen other countries. I mean, it's de facto occupying parts of Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Gaza, Bahrain it's trying to interfere with, the West Bank it's trying to interfere with. So people in Iran see Israel as the great hope, so to speak, for pushing back against the regime, because they're disappointed with successive American presidents in not doing so.
Right, and actually speaking about U.S. presidents, American election is coming up in just a matter of weeks now. But is Iran even being mentioned as a major factor in any of these campaigns?
Well, no. As usual, Iran is mentioned kind of on the sidelines as a side product of reporting on Israel and Gaza, or maybe Israel and Lebanon. Everything's about Israel, 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 which makes ordinary Israelis despair at media coverage. I mean, there are many supporters of Israel that despair with what they might see as skewered coverage in large parts of the American or British or French media. But, you know, Iranians are they despair even more. They don't understand, first of all, why people talk about Iran rather than the Islamic regime. They are not the same thing, any more than, you know, the Soviet government, it was not the same thing as the people of, you know, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and so on. So they despair at the fact that they show these pro-regime rallies and give the impression, I'm talking about the BBC or CNN, they give the impression that there is support for the regime without explaining that university students are threatened with expulsion if they don't attend the pro-regime rallies. Other people are literally paid to go on these rallies saying death to America, death to Israel, death to Britain. The level of support for the regime is low in Iran, and therefore the level of support for Israel and anyone that opposes the regime is high. As a Iranian Muslim, secular Muslim friend says, you know, Tom, Prime Minister Netanyahu is far more popular in North Tehran than he is in North Tel Aviv.
Wow, that's a funny analogy right there. And so generally speaking then, how do you think you could explain the importance of Iran's threat?
Well, I think it's very important, and I think it should be central to foreign policy discussions in the West, in the US election, as you just mentioned, coming up, but also in Europe. There's a lot of focus on Russia, which is a threat, on China, but it's actually Iran that's manufacturing and supplying missiles to Russia. It's Iran that has proxy groups, not just in the Middle East, but increasingly in Africa and Sudan, in Latin America and Venezuela and so on. And it's also exporting a kind of radical Islamic ideology. So I think that people in the West need to address more seriously the strategic threat, especially since they're racing towards a nuclear arsenal. And especially since, were there to be a counter-revolution in Iran, were there the government, the regime to collapse, the Iranian people would almost certainly immediately be friendly and allied with the West. There are natural allies, if I can say, more perhaps than some of the Arab peoples, or more even than the Russians. You know, if Putin's overthrown, I'm not sure that the Russians will necessarily want a leader who's pro-Western. Not so in Iran. Iranian people are pro-Western, pro-Israeli, pro-democracy, pro-women, pro-liberal values. Not everybody, but a large number.
Right. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to the Iranians. Thank you very much, Tom Groves,
You're welcome.
Political commentator and Middle East expert. Thank you.